everyone. Thank you again for coming today to what promises to be an engaging and interesting evening. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad, who currently serves as Prime Minister of Malaysia. He earlier held that office from 1981 to 2003 and originally entered Parliament at the age of 21 in 1964. He is the first Malaysian Prime Minister to not rely on the support of the Barisan National Coalition, which his party defeated in the 2018 general election. Interviewing him, we have our Speaker's Officer, Adam Davies. So without further ado, help me welcome Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to Cambridge Union for this invitation to speak to this very distinguished audience. I'm, of course, the Prime Minister of Malaysia. At one time, of course, we were known as Malaya. And as Malaya, we were a part of the British Empire. And we were a colony, almost a colony of Britain. Although Britain did not conquer us, they came in through treaties with promises to protect us. So we were British protectorate, but unfortunately, they were not able to protect us from the Japanese. So anyway, as a part of the British Empire, we were brought up to be Eurocentric. We feel that all the good things must come from Europe. They are the only people who could do the right things. And so we borrowed from Britain in particular a lot of system, ideologies, ways of thinking, moral values, etc. And when we became independent, of course, Malaysia was very pro-West. We looked to the West for guidance, for ideas, and the like. Halfway through, we decided to look East. This is not something which ex-colonies do, but we decided that we should look East, because in the East, there are many countries which have done very well. Japan, for example, was doing quite well, and was well on the way to becoming the second biggest economy in the world. There was also Korea. Then there was China and other Eastern countries doing quite well. And for that reason, we decided to look East, to learn from the East, because now we find that the East not only had caught up with the West, but in many instances had actually advanced beyond what Western achievements. So after looking at the East, we learned a lot from them, and Malaysia became one of those countries which made tremendous progress to the point where it became known as a newly industrializing country, or sometimes we were known as one of the Asian tigers. We learned from the Japanese a lot of things, not just technology, but also we learned about their work ethics. And we believe that their work ethics contributed to their success. We tried to adopt some of their work ethics, and in the process, Malaysia was able to compete with the other newly independent countries, and we made a lot of progress unexpectedly, because we were an agricultural country, but we became fairly well industrialized by looking at Japan, Korea later on, and now, of course, we are looking at China. Now, we keep on looking at the West, because the West have a lot to teach us. For example, the West taught us that we are not quite democratic. It's one of the things that we learned from the West, that we are not quite democratic, although we do have elections, and the opposition did manage to win quite a number of seats, but we were told that we were not democratic enough because we do not change governments every time we have elections. The same party won every election and continued to be the government of the country. And this lasted for 60 years until in 2018, when the government party, the coalition, which won independence for the country, they lost to a new coalition of the opposition parties. Of course, we were also not really democratic. We were ruled by dictators who had so many cronies. All the people in Malaysia who succeeded in doing well in business in particular, they were the cronies of the government at that time. Again, we learned a lot from this criticism of us. We, of course, had dictators as leaders of the government, and we were quite corrupt, and we ruled without consultation with anybody else. So from the West, we do learn a lot of things from their criticism. But from the East, there was no criticism. They seemed to have nothing to say against us. But the West is always telling us, you are doing things wrong, you are not up to the mark, you are not democratic enough, and all sorts of other criticisms were leveled at us. And of course, we accepted this criticism because we feel that the West doesn't really mean what they say. You know, the English language, sometimes they say one thing and they mean another thing. For example, the chairman in Parliament is called Mr. Speaker, but he's not allowed to speak. Malaysia, of course, is a member of the British Commonwealth of Nations, but the wealth is confined to a few countries only. It's not common at all. During the time when we were under British rule, they used to call the Malay sultans the rulers, but of course they were not allowed to rule. And the rulers had advisors who actually rules. So in the English language, when they say something, it doesn't really mean what they say. So when they criticize us that we are dictators and things like that, I don't think they mean it. So we didn't mind being criticized. We also felt comfortable with Eastern countries which never criticize us. Then we have the New World Order, which is constantly being changed, mostly by the West. The West comes up with a lot of new ideas, and we are told we are told to accept those ideas. For example, they decided that there should be a world without borders. And of course, we never refuse or reject the idea. We accepted the idea. Unfortunately, when they say the world without borders, they meant only capital flows. Capital can flow in and out regardless of the borders. But of course, later on, when you have no borders, people also want to cross to other countries. Now, of course, although they still believe in a borderless world, they are putting up walls and barbed wires to keep out people. So the borders have come back for people, but for capital is okay. The capital comes in and out of our country. And at one time, we suffered from a currency crisis because money came in large quantities to buy shares in our market, pushing up the value of the shares. And when the shares were valued at a higher enough level, they then dumped the shares, took their profits, and left the country, leaving, of course, the locals who had invested together with the foreign investors, hoping to have a very good increase in the value of the shares, suddenly finding that the shares were practically valueless. But these are things that happen all the time, and Malaysia somehow or other managed to handle these problems, in particular with the currency crisis of 1997-98. We survived that because we were unorthodox people. Just as when people were looking at the West, we decided to look at the East. In the case of the currency crisis, we did something wrongful. What we did was we fixed the exchange rate. Nobody can trade in our currency. And of course, we were told the country would collapse. But instead of collapsing, the country did very well and came out of the crisis. Now, of course, the great minds in the IMF and the World Bank says, well, Malaysia was right in doing that. But it's too late for many other countries. So we see today the world in a mess. The world is in a mess. Everywhere you see a lot of things are happening which should not be happening. In Latin America, we have huge numbers of people migrating north to go to America because they see America as a paradise. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump doesn't like the color of their faces, perhaps, and he has erected a wall. But the march still goes on. Even in Europe, you're seeing a lot of Arabs and Africans moving here by the millions. And one country at least put up barbed wire barriers. And the European Union today is not what it is supposed to be. We have Brexit, we have a lot of unhappiness about the union, we have differences of opinion, etc., so that the European Union, instead of being a model for the rest of the world, has now deteriorated and is no longer regarded as a model. In the Middle East, of course, there are wars being fought. Why? It is because the Western world feels there should be a regime change. There should be democracy. And what is the result? The result is anarchy. In many of the Middle Eastern countries, there is a lot of fighting, tribal wars, civil wars, and even open wars between nations. That is what is happening in the Middle East. And also we are looking at the confrontation between US and China, and also US and Iran. And this confrontation has led to warships being sent to the South China Sea and to the Gulf, and we are now on the brink of a war. God forbid that we should have a war now, because we are likely to destroy this whole world. But again, the East is very silent. We are not proposing ideas for the rest of the world to accept. We are ready and willing to accept ideas coming from the rest of the world, basically from the West. And we find, unfortunately, that after fighting wars for more than 3 millennium, we find that the idea of wars to settle conflict is still there. And the threats are always being thrown at various small countries. And if you don't accept the sanctions being imposed on a country, if you try to trade with that country, then you too will face sanctions. So the world is not free at all. We are being governed by the most powerful countries in the world. My belief is that war is a crime. Killing people, if you kill a person, you will be charged for murder. However, if you kill 7 million people, you are decorated with medals and they erect statues for you. So this seems to be at odds with our moral values. You kill one person, it's okay. It's not okay. You will be charged and probably be hanged if you are in Malaysia. We still have the death penalty. But if you kill 7 million people, that's okay. You are glorified, your name appears in history books and all that. So there is something wrong with our way of thinking. Problems, conflicts between nations should not be settled through killing people. That's what war is all about killing people. I think we should be civilized enough to avoid killing people. My belief is that unless we reject war as a means of settling conflicts and instead replace it with negotiation, arbitration, and resort to a court of law, then I think our civilization will be regressing. My belief is that despite 4 million years of living as civilized people, we are still very primitive. We are still at the level of killing people in order to solve problems. I hope that one day the idea that war is a crime would be accepted by the world. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to start off with a question relating to the content of your speech. So you talked about how Malaysia should learn from the East rather than from the West. Why do you think Malaysia, unlike other post-colonial nations, was able to learn from the East?
Well, despite having been ruled by the West over a long period of time and being told to be Eurocentric, we did notice that the countries of the East were able to do well, to develop themselves, to acquire the technologies, to compete and to win. And they must be doing something right. And because of that, after visiting Japan and Korea for several times, it was decided that we should look at them they must be doing something right. That is why Malaysia decided to change course and turn towards the east while remaining with our Western values.
In the last few months, one of the Asian tigers of Taiwan has legalized gay marriage. Do you think Malaysia should learn from the East in that way?
I don't understand this gay marriage. Marriage is about, well, procuring children. But gay marriage, do they get children? What do they do? Well, they adopt children and things like that. Today, the institution of marriage has been discarded almost. No marriage, no family. What are we going to be? To us, this is a regressive way of thinking. Simply because you think people should be free, then they can do what they like, and they feel like marrying men and men, women and women, oh, that's okay, that's their right. I think rights have got limits.
So
There's no such thing as absolute right to do everything.
So should old people who can't have children be allowed to get married? Or should infertile people be allowed to get married?
Well, if you get married, it must be between a man and a woman.
Okay. So you've kind of gotten back into politics quite recently after a kind of a spell out of politics. Why did you choose to get back involved? Why did you decide to become Prime Minister again?
I didn't decide. Actually, I stepped down voluntarily. Nobody pushed me out. And I thought I would have a good rest and retire like everybody else. But a week after I stepped down, people came to see me and asking me, please do something about the new Prime Minister, because he has discarded all the things that he promised to do. After some time, the pressure became very, very strong, and of course, the fifth Prime Minister had to resign and give way to a sixth Prime Minister. And the sixth one is even worse. He stole money. And everybody comes to see me, please do something about this. I said, why don't you do something? They were afraid. So I had to come forward and stick out my neck as usual. And in the process, of course, we were able to defeat the party in power.
Interesting. So going back to your first period as Prime Minister, do you regret your application of the Internal Security Act, kind of to incarcerate people without trials? That's been pretty widely criticized in the West at the time.
The Prime Ministers before me were using the same law, so did the British. We inherited this from the British. And you know, we were so Western-oriented that we thought anything that the British did must be right. So we adopted that law, but of course, later on, the ideas change, values change, and they say it was not right to detain people without trial. So eventually, we abolished that.
All right. So in the past kind of period since you became Prime Minister in May 2018, you moved to ban Israeli swimmers from coming to Malaysia as part of the World Paris Swimming Championships. Why did you do that?
Which one?
Why did you ban Israelis from coming to swim in a competition?
Well, we respect people who respect other people. The Israelis didn't respect other people. You take a country that belongs to somebody else and you create a state of Israel. Never compensate anything. Did not ask for a plebiscite or a referendum. You just took the land and gave it to Israel. That is wrong.
But did those swimmers do that? Did those swimmers take any land from Palestinians?
Yeah, they took the land from the Palestinians, and now they are even building settlements on Palestinian land. Can you imagine the Israelis taking over Cambridge and calling it Israel? How do you like that?
No, but did those particular swimmers do anything like that? They were just disabled swimmers coming to Malaysia for a competition. How is it fair to hold a kind of individuals responsible for their country's mistakes in your view?
We are not in a position to punish them, to invade Israel, or do things that other powerful countries can do. The only thing we can do is stop them from coming to Malaysia.
If you could, would you?
Well, if I could, I would punish this country, which has stolen other people's land, have killed a lot of people, broken international laws, and do all kinds of things that has never been done by other countries, by other people. Imagine setting up settlements in other people's countries and preventing the people of that country from even entering the settlement they set up.
So you would invade Israel if you could?
I would.
Going beyond Israel, you've said some pretty hateful things about Jewish people in general since kind of in 2003 and more recently. You've said that the Holocaust was overstated in the historical record, that Jewish people control the world by proxy, and even that you're glad to be labeled anti-Semitic. Do you regret these statements? Do you think they reflect your views now?
Well, if they are still true, I will continue to stay with my statement. For example, I didn't say anything against the Holocaust, but what I did say was that the Israelis should know from the sufferings they went through in the war not to treat others like that.
So did you not say that 4 million people and not 6 million people died in the Holocaust? You said in the past that 4 million and not 6 million people died in the Holocaust.
I didn't say 4 million.
Okay.
Somebody else did.
Okay. So you've been kind of going beyond kind of Israel, LGBT rights. You've been talking a lot about foreign affairs recently. So what do you think of what's going on in Sudan at the moment? I know you've spoken about that in the recent past.
Well, I don't know about Sudan. I was in power in Malaysia for quite a long time. I decided to step down, but people are simply unable to take that step to step down and give way to other people. They always want to perpetuate themselves. Also, if they've done something wrong, they know that if they give her power, they might have to pay a high price.
But you came back after leaving, so that's different in some cases than...
I came back because the very opposition, which used to call me dictator and all kinds of nasty names, decided that I should be their leader and I should lead them to beat the government. And that's what I did, at their request, not my request.
All right, 2 more questions, and I'll turn it over to you guys. So when you kind of criticize Jewish people, do you think it's fair to label all Jewish people by the alleged crimes of the Israeli state?
The Malays used to be labeled as lazy people. It's not that all Malays are lazy. Some of them are hardworking, but they generalize and call the whole Malay population as lazy. So in the case of the Jews, of course, not all Jews are bad. I had a lot of Jewish friends here in Britain, but most of them support the wrong things being done by Israel, gave them money. And of course, if you say anything against the Jews, you are labeled as anti-Semitic. No other race in this world labels people like that. Why is it so difficult? Why is it forbidden for us to criticize the Jews when they and other people criticize us?
So I'm an American of Jewish heritage, and obviously Americans are the American state very much supports the state of Israel in foreign affairs. So wouldn't it be unfair to say that all Americans are money-obsessed and greedy and hook-nosed because of that? Why are you particularly focusing on Jewish people?
Well, the Jews do a lot of wrong things which force us to pass comments. And see, for example, we tried to send some relief material to Gaza. They intercepted the boat in international waters, took the boats to their port, and confiscated all the things that we brought along in order to help the people in Gaza. It is a mercy mission. They don't care. And 9 people were killed because of this mission.
Sorry, one last question. Isn't that Israel as opposed to Jewish people in general, though? The Israeli state did send the commanders. It wasn't Jewish people in France, it wasn't Jewish people in the United States, it wasn't Jewish people in Britain. It was Israel that did that.
I'm waiting for the Jewish people to condemn Israel.
So when Jewish people in the US and the UK and Israel criticize the settlements...
If they condemn that, it means that they separate themselves from the deeds of the Israelis.
So you,
Currently, they are supporting.
so you don't think that Jewish people are hook... But like when you say Jewish people are hook-nosed, you're saying just Jewish people. You're not saying Jewish people that support the state of Israel. You're generalizing the whole population. Do you think that's right?
Well, people do generalize in describing certain people. We take some general characteristic that they have. Why is it that it's the Jews who resent this when other people don't resent being accused of some general characteristic they have?
All right. I think that's enough on that line of questioning from me. Would anyone like to, if anyone would like to give a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, and a microphone will come to you. Could we have you over there?
So there's an increasing scholarship, including from academics at Cambridge, commenting on an increasing trend of developing countries assisting each other in international development since late 2000s, early 2010s, etc. And of course, alongside that, we have a perhaps ignored and dismissed history of developing countries helping each other, before that, and somewhat being ignored perhaps. To what extent do you believe that South-South development cooperation is sometimes been labeled is a recent phenomena or has a much longer history that should be uncovered more?
I can't get the last.
I think the gist of it was, do you think that developing countries helping one another economically is something that's happened recently, or does it have a longer history?
Well, sometimes we do help each other. That is why we formed ASEAN, the group of 10 countries in Southeast Asia. And it is the only grouping that has survived all these years. And one should notice that in ASEAN countries, there is no war. We settle our problems through negotiation, through arbitration, or a court of law. We had problems with Singapore, we had problems with Indonesia and Thailand. All these things were settled without having to resort to killing people.
Thank you. Anyone else? You on the right? Yeah, you.
Good evening, Tun. My name is Balkis. I'm studying law at Queen Mary University of London. You recently criticized the lack of a global rule of law, the sovereign inequality between the third world and the first world countries, and also the abuse of international law by the current geopolitical powers due to their overlapping interests. So how do you think the smaller countries like Malaysia and other Eastern countries for that matter could claim their own narrative in the international liberal order? And another second question, very quickly, do you find it that if we rely on China, say for example, the Asian Investment Bank is better than getting some monetary helps from IMF or any other institutions based in the Western countries for that matter? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I think the first question was, how do you think smaller countries like Malaysia can kind of use the international law in geopolitics to defend their own interests?
Well, I think the world promotes democracy. But when it comes to the United Nations, there is no democracy at all. Now, if the United Nations is made more democratic, I think little countries need not fear the big countries. What we see is a separation between the powerful countries and the weak countries in the United Nations. Well, in order to give everybody a fair hearing, you should have a round table where everybody sits at the round table, each one having only one vote. It doesn't matter whether you are the United States of America or China, but you have one vote. Just like in elections, we don't give more votes to the rich people or the educated people. Everyone has one vote. But this is where we fail. We accept the victory of certain countries 70 years ago as if this is going to be a permanent victory. They have the right to veto other people's ideas, other people's thought. We are not democratic, and this organization is supposed to promote democracy. First, promote democracy in the United Nations, then we don't have to have any choice whether we are with this country or that country.
Thank you. I think we'll stick to one question per person. Thank you. You in the back?
Hello, hi there. Thank you for being with us. My name is Shadi Qubati. I'm from Yemen. I'm a third-year student at Yale University. I had a question for you. As someone who saw Malaysia go through the whole stage of modernization, where do you see the future of many countries in the Middle East, specifically Yemen, Syria, and Iraq? What's the way forward for these countries as we're trying to speak about this more democratic approach? Thank you.
Well, if we are not disturbed by big powers trying to fiddle with small countries, trying to get them to support their side and all that, we could, Malaysia can develop very well in the present situation because we don't take sides with anyone. Malaysia wants to be a friend to all the countries in the world, irrespective of their ideology. We don't presume to change internal affairs of other countries. That way, if everybody practices that, the world would be a much better place than shooting ships or bringing down airplanes, etc.
Thank you. In the front? Yeah. You'll get one.
Prime Minister, just like genocide, racial discrimination is a non-derogatory offense under international law. It has the status of jus cogens. It is arguable that Malaysia's affirmative action under Article 153 is racially discriminatory. Even if it falls under Article 22 of ICERD, it has arguably led to the maintenance of separate rights, although you may argue that it should only continue until it reaches the objectives for which they were taken. But essentially, they are racially discriminatory. How would you respond to that? Thank you.
Well, it so happens that in Malaysia we have 3 different races. Some races have done very well, others are not doing so well. If we allow things to go on, the disparity between the rich and the poor will correspond to the differences in their race. And that is not healthy. When you have in a country one race not only being of that race but also rich and powerful, and another race being very poor, you are going to have confrontation. If you look at this country, at one time in England, the rich capitalists had all the factories and all that, where they employ workers, and workers were badly treated. So there was an uprising of sorts. And in Russia, there was a revolution, violence, lots of killing, the Tsar was shot dead, etc. We don't want that to happen. We want to reduce the disparity between rich and poor, in particular if it is also connected with the race of the people. If we don't do that, then in Malaysia you are going to find one race very, very rich and one race very, very poor, and there will be confrontations and violence, and Malaysia will not be able to develop.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Tun. My name is Raif. I'm basically a PhD student in London, UCL. This question is kind of a bit out of topic. Do Malaysian government has financial relations with Indonesian government in history? Thank you. Malaysian government has financial relations with Indonesian government.
I'm not sure I follow either. So have they, or?
Indonesia.
Yeah.
We have no relation with them. As you know, the rupiah is not like the ringgit. The rupiah has depreciated to the point where 1 million rupiah would buy about $100, 100 ringgit of goods. So they have gone their way. We have gone our way. We do not try to chase the increase in the prices of goods and services by increasing income. You do that, you are going to have inflation, and that inflation will lead to the devaluation of your currency. As you can see, the currency in Malaysia is still acceptable, is still being used. In Indonesia, sometimes when you stay in their hotels, they prefer to be paid in American dollars.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You famously wrote that the Malays are spiritually inclined, tolerant, and easygoing, while the non-Malays are materialistic, aggressive, and have an appetite for work. So I was wondering, do you think these generalizations have a place in New Malaysia?
Well, at this moment, there is still elements of that in Malaysia. The Malays are disinclined to work very hard, whereas Chinese are very good business people. They work very hard, and they accumulate a lot of wealth. They came to Malaysia as coolies, as laborers. But today, their children, their grandchildren are millionaires. But the Malays who originally were identified with the Malay states and the Chinese were foreigners, but we find that the Malays are lagging behind because they don't work hard enough. Of course, some people may disagree with me, but that is what I maintain.
You in the back?
Hi, you earlier said that the British used to think that the Malays were lazy, and that this is something that we shouldn't be thinking because it's a negative generalization, and it leads to being bigoted and to being racist, and that's not something that's good. But over the course of the last hour, you've been talking a lot about Jews with hook noses and Chinese people who all work too hard and Malays who are all too lazy. Surely, as any kind of person, let alone the leader of a world government, should hold themselves to a higher standard than the British and their backwards ways many years ago. And you should try your best not to generalize. And even though people generalize, as you said earlier, you should try to avoid generalization because it leads towards being racist, it leads towards being bigoted, and actually avoid solving the problems because you're making generalizations which generally don't exist.
Well, whether we like it or not, sometimes we have to generalize in order to put people in certain category in comparison with other people. I don't think people should feel very hurt. I know the British used to say that the Malays are lazy. I'm afraid that sometimes I do agree with them, but that is a generalization. There are lots of hardworking Malays who are prepared to do everything possible to improve their situation.
So if you, just one question for me. So if you acknowledge that there are many Malays that kind of fall outside of the generalization, why do you say that Jewish people in general are inclined towards money? Why can't you say, in the same way, there's some clever Malays, some hardworking Malays, there are lots of Jewish people, maybe perhaps most Jewish people, that care about human rights, care about social justice, care about democracy.
As I told you, I had some Jewish friends, very good friends. They are not like the other Jews. That's why they are my friends. They were.
Over here. You in the back. You've had your hand up for a while.
Testing. Salam Sejahtera Tun. Thank you for everything you and PH leaders are doing for Malaysia. You're probably going to smirk a bit at my question. It's about the recent appointment of Latifah Koya as the chief of the MACC. You know where I'm going with this. So my question is not about whether Latifah is qualified. I think I and many other Malaysians fully agree that she's an awesome superwoman, very much suitable for the job. And it's also not about the legality of her appointment, because we're all aware it is in line with the Constitution as it currently stands. My question is, given the spirit of PH's promise, given the kleptocracy of Mr. Najib in the past, to have institutional reforms with respect to the Prime Minister's power, why have you chosen to make this appointment unilaterally versus going through, say, a parliamentary select committee, consultation with the cabinet, or any number of other alternative methods? So why, in particular, in this case, have you chosen to be unilateral versus using other methods? Thank you.
I've chosen 20 other people to head various institutions. Nobody said anything. But now with Latifah Koya, I don't know why people are so interested in whether I followed due process or not. The thing is that PH decided that the choice of such officers should be done by Parliament through a select committee of Parliament. But to do that, to have a select committee and to change the way we appoint a person, we need to amend the Constitution. To amend the Constitution requires a two-thirds majority. We don't have the two-thirds majority. We cannot amend the Constitution. And so we continue with the old practice. The old practice is that I get names and I decide who should be appointed. It's my choice. And I put it before the king, and the king approves. That's the procedure. I didn't go against the procedure. That was the procedure before. It is still there now until you change the Constitution and allow for a select committee of Parliament to do the appointment. Then I will abide by that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Many post-colonial nations, especially in Africa, struggle to establish an effective central government. So given that Malaysia has many outlying islands as well as the traditional monarchies, how is it that Malaysia relatively successfully is able to balance regional versus central interests? Thank you.
Oh yeah, so he's asking about how Malaysia, how it successfully managed regions and the central government and keep everything together.
Yeah, Malaysia is a federal state. It's not a union. We agreed at the time when it was founded that the state should remain as the state, the identity of the states. They do not want to give up the power that they had over their own state. So we drew up a list of functions that is allocated to the federal government and the ones that are given to the states. The states, for example, they have authority over resources, over land matters, and a few other things. But for the federal government, we are in charge of law and order. We have a single army and single police force that operates throughout the federation. This is done by agreement, and everybody seems to be happy with that kind of agreement. And of course, if they are not happy, they can express their unhappiness, and if we have a need to change the constitution, which is a federal constitution, then we will do so, provided we can get the necessary majority. Thank you.
Thank you as well. You there?
Thank you. Prime Minister, earlier you commented on how the West's opinions of democracy in Southeast Asia and the like, and perhaps with a degree of irony to them. I'd be interested to know, what are your thoughts on democracy in Southeast Asia yourself, especially the recent elections in Thailand or the re-election of President Jokowi?
There are many interpretations of democracy. We have liberal democracy, we have some kind of limited democracy to fit the situation. In Malaysia, there is a tendency for the different races to confront each other. And therefore, if we allow liberal democracy to function in Malaysia, the races might be saying nasty things about each other. In the end, there will be violence, and the country will become unstable, and it cannot develop. So to that extent, we do not allow such racial remarks to be made openly. Of course, at home they can say what they like. But openly, they should not pass remarks which only annoy other races, because we don't want to have a situation where the country is up in arms fighting each other, as you see in some of the newly democratized countries like Libya, where tribal problems arose because they were not subjected to rules with regard to action and freedom of speech.
All right. The woman there? Yeah, you. No, the woman behind you, sorry.
Hi, my name is Maddie. Thank you for being here. So the concept of sustainable development asks us to balance the social, economic, and environmental pillars. And I'm wondering what your vision is for ensuring that Malaysia's palm oil sector actually does that going forward. Thank you.
She's asking about how Malaysia's palm oil sector is balancing the environment and the economy. The palm oil?
Oh, the palm oil. Yeah. We are having problem with palm oil. Palm oil is the cheapest vegetable oil that can be that is edible. The other oils, you have to plant soybean, for example, every year to produce soybean oil. It's the same with rapeseed and others. But with palm trees, you plant today, for 25 years you harvest without having to do anything. So for that reason, palm oil is able to compete and win against those original soybean source of oil. There is a competition there, and palm oil is likely to win. So they invented this idea that we are cutting down trees to plant palm trees. We are depriving animals of their habitat. But we have to have living space for ourselves. We have to make some money from the resources that we have. And what we have is that we have fertile soil suitable for palm oil, and therefore we produce we grow oil palm and produce palm oil. We want to compete with the rest of the world in a fair way. But when you start talking about the environment, you are clearing forests, and look at Britain, for example. Where is Sherwood Forest? Is still there? Is Robin Hood still operating from there? They have disappeared. Most of the Europe has cleared all the forests in Europe, so much so that there are no wild animals in Europe. But in Malaysia, believe me, we still have tigers. If you like to go into the jungle, we can send you there and see whether you will survive or not.
Okay, cool. We'll do 2 last questions, and then the Prime Minister will have to go. So you over there?
Prime Minister, my name is Meng Han. I'll be interested to know your view on how relations with Singapore have evolved since your last time in power. And the second question is, how do you see the trade war and what its impact on Malaysia and Southeast Asia?
Well, we have a little problem with Singapore. Yeah. Way back in 1926, when Singapore and the peninsula were under British rule, the British decided to sell raw water at 3 cents per 1,000 gallons. That was in 1926. The cost of things have gone up. But now Singapore still insists that they pay only 3 cents per 1,000 gallons of raw water, which when they purify and made potable, they sell at 17 Singapore dollars. It's about 50 Malaysian ringgit for 1,000 gallons of treated water. Do you think it is fair? We think it is not fair. You buy for 3 cents and you sell for 50 ringgit. So we are trying to negotiate with them. We don't want to go to war with them, but we want to be good friends. We negotiated, but we have been negotiating for years and years, and they refuse to give in at all until now. They are still paying 3 cents per 1,000 gallons, which they can sell for 50 ringgit per 1,000 gallons after treatment. I don't know whether that is fair or not fair, but to us it seems unfair. To Singapore it must have been fair to them because they still maintain they should pay only 3 cents. With 3 cents you can't even buy one bungkus of nasi lemak. Yeah, but
okay.
With the Korean War, I think there was the trade war, China, not the Korean War. I think it is silly. It is stupid. It's not the way to solve problems. Well, sit around the table and discuss this matter and find solutions. If you find that the Chinese are selling too much to the United States, then of course you tell them you cut down on your sales. The U.S. acts against the Chinese, and we become the victims. We had done nothing wrong to the U.S. at all. We are very good friends of the U.S., excepting with Mr. Trump. But you know, this trade war is not giving the U.S. Doing anything good for the U.S. or for China. But we, on the fringes, we have to pay a price. We have done nothing wrong. I think it is unjust. Let's get these two big nations, matured nations, civilized nations, come and sit together and discuss how you can solve your imbalance in the trade. That's all that happens, imbalance in trade. But if due to imbalance you are going to have trade wars, I would like to have trade wars with quite a number of countries which export too much to Malaysia.
Interesting. I'll have one last question from you.
Hi, Tun. At first I wanted to ask you, have you seen the video? But then I realized there's a bigger question to that. I think over time there's been a lot of scandals that's been uncovered, and your coalition is starting to show some weaknesses. Do you think the coalition can last until the next election? And what will you do to make sure it stays? Thank you.
Depends upon you. We keep on supporting us, we'll last until the next.
Fair enough. It's now the Prime Minister's time to leave, I'm afraid to say. So if you could please stay seated while the Prime Minister leaves, and then we'll tell you when it's time to go. Thank you.